Hi, it's Tuesday the 28th of December and welcome to Scotland and 7. In the studio tonight with myself, Hugh, Stewart, my colleague Brian Liddy. We'll be discussing the news that have come to us today. So first of all, let's go over the coronavirus update for today. Now, no data is being published by the Scottish Government over the holiday period from the 25th to the 28th of December. However, they have released provisional figures up until today. And the provisional data for the 28th of December indicates a continued high level of cases of COVID-19 being recorded. The daily totals for each of the 25th, 26th, 27th and 28th of December are the highest recorded in Scotland since the start of the pandemic. Given that not everyone with symptoms books a test and that some people can be affected and not have symptoms, the true number of infections is likely to be higher still. The figures are for the 25th of December 21, 8,252 cases, for the 28th of December 11,030 cases, for the 27th of December 10,562 cases, and for the 28th of December, that's today, that's an estimated 9,360 cases. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, "While these figures remain provisional, the significantly increased transmissibility of Omicron is reflected in the steep increase in cases now materialising, and we would expect to see case numbers rise further in the days to come. I am grateful for the continued efforts of the public in complying with the guidance issued in the run-up to Christmas. Without this, it is likely that the figures would have been even higher." Ms Sturgeon said that these figures serve to underline the importance of people continually getting boosted by the bells and following the guidance to help slow the spread of COVID while we complete the accelerated booster programme. Acknowledging how hard this is, Ms Sturgeon emphasised that it really is important that people continue to comply with the guidance over the New Year period. She said, "We must not underestimate the impact of Omicron. Even if the rate of hospitalisation associated with it is lower than past strains of the virus, case numbers this high will still put an inevitable further strain on the NHS and create significant levels of disruption due to sickness absence across the economy and critical services," she said. The First Minister added that in addition to observing good hand hygiene and wearing face coverings, and called upon everyone to limit their contacts as much as possible. She said, "Please keep any essential indoor gatherings to a maximum of 3 households and get boosted by the bells," the First Minister said. The next update will be published tomorrow. The latest UK daily figures, which report data from England, shows 148,021 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 18. This number referring to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. So Brian, those are some very provisional figures, and obviously that's an estimate for today. Nonetheless, we can see already those figures are something like 4 times what they were a month ago. I remember reading out figures from end of November, start of December. It was about 2,500 a day. So it looks like for the last 4 days it's more like 10 or 11,000. So First Minister was right when she said Omicron was going to be spread.
Yeah, it's quite disconcerting, especially at this time of year, in the middle of winter, when we've got coughs and colds and flus to kind of muddy the waters with symptoms, and also the fact that everybody wants to get together for Christmas and New Year. So it's tricky.
So the data continues to show that there is an increase, of course, in spread, and that's exactly what everyone thought it would do. Now, if the numbers are 4 times higher than they were a month ago, then that means Omicron would have to be 4 times milder to keep the hospitalisation at the same level. And as yet, do we know if it's 4 times milder?
I don't think we do yet. I saw a figure today which said that really the incubation period for Omicron is perhaps longer than it was for the previous variant, the Delta variant, which means that instead of just waiting 10 days, we should maybe wait 17 or so days before we find out exactly where this is going. And also, I think I'm right. I'm happy to stand corrected, but I think I saw Professor Leach saying that in a room of 100 people, if there's one person in that room with Omicron, then by the end of the evening, up to 50% or 50 people within the room could contract Omicron, which is a lot more than was with the previous variant. And if you think about public transport, if you transpose that, but so we just have to be very careful.
Yep, that's right. Wear masks. Of course, we have to wear masks in trains and buses anyway, as you and I always do when we get a bus home. But yes, I don't know if the figures are right, but sorry, I'm not saying figures are wrong, but I have heard Professor Leach and the First Minister talk about the attack rate, as they call it.
Yeah, I think
the Omicron will jump very readily from one person to another.
Yeah, I think the issue is that at the moment, all of these are predictions. They're not, facts and figures and data that's been verified. So I think we just have to continue to be careful and continue to monitor the situation and look at the facts.
Yep,
when we have
maintain
them.
hygiene and keep wearing the mask. So I should have said, of course, there will be further updates tomorrow. I think the First Minister will be addressing Parliament. I'll check on that. I think the First Minister is going to address the Scottish Parliament this week to give us further updates, and we'll try and get some more clarity on those estimates. Yes, in fact, it will be. Yeah, the First Minister will be in the Scottish Parliament for a special session tomorrow, updating us on Omicron and trying to put some more concrete figures on those estimates over the holiday weekend. Moving on, Brian, a senior UN official today has called on Myanmar authorities to investigate the reported killing of at least 35 civilians, which opposition activists have blamed on government soldiers. The ruling military has not commented on the killings near Moso village in Akaya state on Friday, and several calls since Saturday to the junta spokesman Zaw Min Tun went unanswered. Save the Children has confirmed that 2 of its staff were killed in a Christmas Eve massacre blamed on junta troops, which left the charred remains of dozens of people on a highway in eastern Myanmar. Anti-junta fighters said that they found more than 30 bodies, including women and children, on a highway in Kaya State, where pro-democracy rebels have been fighting the military. Save the Children later said that 2 of its staff members had been caught up in the incident and were missing. Myanmar has been in chaos since the coup this February, with more than 1,300 people killed in a crackdown by security forces, according to a local monitoring group. Self-proclaimed People's Defence Forces have sprung up across the country to fight the junta and drawn the military into a bloody stalemate of clashes and reprisals. Save the Children confirmed today that 2 men were among at least 35 people, including women and children, who were killed. The United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, said he was horrified by the reports and demanded that the government conduct an investigation. Well, Brian, that's been a very stormy situation in Myanmar, isn't it? So remember what happened there was, I think 2015, the military regime handed over to civilian control under Aung San Suu Kyi, but that only lasted until this February when they, in another military coup, Myanmar's mainly been under military control over the last 30 years or so. So once again, the army moved in back in February. Aung San Suu Kyi is currently in jail awaiting trial for some charge or other. So, the path to democracy is not smooth in Myanmar.
No, and I think indeed that when I was hearing about this, atrocious story, this atrocious act, I couldn't help but think I was reminded of George Orwell's Burmese Days, which is worth reading. It goes back to the days when Burma was, as it was called, Myanmar was originally called Burma, was part of the British Empire, and it gives you a really good insight into what life was like then. Orwell was based in the country at the time, but so it's worthwhile if you're trying to find out more about the background to this kind of atrocity. I think also I'm right in saying that I found a reference today saying that a lot of these images of this recent atrocity of 35 people that have been killed in Myanmar is now being shared around social media in the country, and which is bringing in an increase in fueled outrage against the current military junta. So hopefully that will increase and we will begin to see more democracy in that country.
Yeah, it seems that there's, from what I had a quick look today, that the Kaya State, where a lot of the atrocities are alleged to have happened, the Kaya State actually is one of the ethnic areas in that country. But they're not actually looking for independence. They're not saying let's break away and form a new state. But the political activists there are looking for a federation. They're saying that Myanmar needs to represent all of the different ethnicities in it. But the military is just taking a hardline attitude and they're not listening to any other voices.
It's incredibly complicated, the situation in Myanmar. I mean, I realised that today just when we were looking into this story. And for example, there was a website that I went on to called Myanmar Now, which is independent and tries to give accurate reports of what's happening in Myanmar. And when you scroll through that website, just every single story was about conflict, or political corruption. And then when you try to look into what happened with that Christmas Eve massacre, if you do a web search, then so many things come up about the very complicated history about how that country was part of the British Empire and then became independent on the back of a military junta, and then the long, slow move towards democracy with Aung San Suu Kyi, and then once she was in charge of a democratic parliament, then the fact that the country still has a really poor record internationally when it comes to human rights. So all of this just seems to show that it's a country that's just in terrible state of conflict and unease at the moment.
Yes, it's really been in civil war because of the ethnic divisions and the way the military decides to crack down on that. It's also not surprisingly a very poor country. I had to look again today and it's something like 147th out of about 188 countries in the World Bank's list of well-beings. Average incomes are something like $1,400. So it is a poor state, so it's not surprising. You need, first of all, stable government if you're going to try and make any progress. Well, we have to move on, Brian. So back home now, we have in Scotland the introduction of the new social security system, which has been gradually devolved ever since the Smith Commission. And we heard earlier on this year that the introduction of the adult disability payment and the extension of the Scottish Child Payment to children under 16 will see a major increase in the number of people eligible to receive Scottish benefits in 2022. The Scottish Child Payment will increase to £20 from April next year, giving increased support to 111,000 children under the age of 6. When it's extended to all children under 16 by the end of 2022, subject to the DWP making the data available, we'll see the number of eligible children more than double to 400,000. Adult Disability Payment, the ADP, is the 12th benefit and the most complex to be introduced so far. Will replace the UK government's PIP, the Personal Independence Payment. It will be phased in from March next year with a nationwide rollout at the end of August. To support this, the Social Security Scotland is in the process of recruiting up to 2,000 people by the autumn of 2022, with the first new recruits set to start early in the new year. This is the biggest expansion since its creation in 2018, creating jobs and a boost to local economies. People who currently get disability benefits from the DWP, the UK's Department of Work and Pensions, will have their rewards transferred to the new Scottish system in stages after the new benefits are introduced from summer 22. Minister for Social Security Ben McPherson said, 2022 will be our biggest year yet in building a new social security system for Scotland with the powers we have. The major milestones of introducing the adult disability payment and extending the Scottish Child Payment will be transformative for many people with a disability or a health condition and for families on low incomes. By the end of 2022, we aim to have extended the Scottish Child Payment to all those under the age of 16, subject to the DWP making the data available, increasing eligibility to around 400,000 children. From April, the doubling of our Scottish Child Payment will significantly help us to reduce child poverty and build a fairer society. Well, Brian, this is, as I mentioned earlier on, one of the changes that came in after the Smith Commission, just to recap, following the vote no in the independence referendum in 14, Scotland was promised new powers. So this is one of them. So Scotland is gradually taking over some of the things that were distributed by the UK's DWP. So this is the biggest one yet. So do you think that's going to increase the power and the influence or the kind of the political weight of the Scottish government compared to the UK government?
Yeah, I think this can only be good news. We often hear in discourses about a potential new referendum for independence, or why isn't the government in Holyrood able to do the things that it wants to do? And you'll hear the reply that they can't because they don't have the levers. The Scottish government does not have the control of all the levers that it would need or want to if it's going to try and eradicate poverty, especially in work poverty. So this is one of those levers that will mean more powers going to Holyrood. It's good that it also means more jobs, which are going to be based here in Scotland. So those people earning wages will be spending that money in Scotland. So the money stays here rather than civil servants based in London. It also means that, that there's going to be a big change in how the new payments are going to be administered, because Mr. McPherson has said that he's confirmed that they will be doing it differently from how things are done currently with the Department of Work and Pensions. It will be a much more humane system, and it will be much more fairly administered, and it will be a lot less traumatic for anybody who is going through the process. And at the end of the day, if it reduces poverty, then it's got to be a good thing. And as I say, especially in work poverty, which is an incredible situation that people are fully employed and yet still having to claim benefits. So if we can get enough going on here in Scotland to get rid of that kind of situation, then it's all for the good.
Okay, so social security, it's a huge budget in Scotland. Increasingly it's taking over the administration of that. And as you said, Brian, the idea was based on the word respect. So people who are entitled to benefits, they will be treated with respect by the civil servants who are in charge of looking after them. So that's a major increase in next year on the role and the powers of the Scottish Government. But as Ben McPherson also said, only once the DWP actually gives them the files. Previously, the Scottish Government hasn't been gathering the information on who gets it and who needs it, so we have to get that database of information handed over, and that seems to be one of the things that's holding it back just now. Next story, we're looking at the report which has come in today from England that there's a shortage of lateral flow tests, the LFTs, and a lack of walk-in test slots across England, threatening to undermine the government's plans for New Year's celebrations to go ahead unimpeded. Pharmacies across England report having run out of test kits for distribution to the public before Christmas and have been unable to receive additional kits as the supply chain has been disrupted by Christmas and Boxing Day holidays. Some community pharmacies in rural areas say they have not received any deliveries of LFTs since early last week, although many remained closed on Monday and Tuesday because of the extended bank holidays. People turning to the NHS website were also out of luck. On Tuesday morning, that's today, it said that no delivery slots for LFTs were available. That's for the second day in a row. But by mid-afternoon, deliveries were once again being offered with a warning that the LFT kits could take 3 days to arrive. The NHS site has also indicated that there were no walk-ins in LFT or PCR tests available anywhere in England by Tuesday morning. That was today. By early afternoon, the site was indicating availability of PCR tests in most parts of England, although some areas were close to running out. COVID cases in England reached a new high of 113,628 on Christmas Day, and 1,281 people were admitted to hospital. That's the highest daily figure since mid-February. So Brian, not surprisingly, the COVID infection rates in England, of course, have jumped up because of Omicron. So I suppose that really, in a way, it's not surprising that there's a massive increase in demand for the testing kits. So maybe in a way, that's good news. A lot of people are turning up to get tested.
Yeah, I suppose it depends how you look at it. You could look at it either way. I think it does seem that it's only a shortage that's been brought about because of disruptions to the supply chain. If you think about it, Christmas Day and Boxing Day fell on the weekend here, Saturday and Sunday, and then technically yesterday and today are therefore kind of alternative bank holidays to kind of make up for the fact that Christmas fell over a weekend this year. So that combined with, as you say, any disruption in supply lines because of the low number of heavy goods vehicle drivers for deliveries, either because of COVID or because of Brexit, isn't going to help. And as you say, hopefully if there is an increase in demand because people want to get more tests done, then that's a good thing. But and then of course Omicron coming in on top of that isn't going to help either. If there's more people becoming infected, then that's also going to put pressure on the supply line. But it's a little bit disconcerting. I mean, as you've often said, we all test before we come in here, and certainly today, any day, having done a test, it puts my mind at rest before I come in here to think that I'm less likely to be exposed to COVID or Omicron. And and this is just anecdotal, but I was listening to David Lammy today on a rival radio talk show, and he said that he was based in London. David Lammy is the Labour MP somewhere in London. He said he was struggling to find COVID test case and he was about to run out. But I did try to find out if there were similar shortages here in Scotland. The First Minister had made an assurance back in September that there would be no shortages of any test kits here in Scotland, and just going online, so it's not really very in-depth long-term investigation journalism or anything, but I couldn't really see any tweets or anything on social media where people were saying in Scotland that they were finding they were unable to find test kits. So hopefully it's not an issue here for us at all.
Okay, well, if any pharmacist in Scotland anywhere runs out, I'm sure we'll read about it in the unionist media. Certainly anecdotally anyway, I've certainly had no shortage in Glasgow. We went to the pharmacist recently and there are plenty. We've got plenty. And if you haven't stocked up with test kits recently, we're happy to report, Brian and I, that the new green boxes are much easier to use. We'll just leave it at that. It's easier to use and you get a quicker result than the old ones. So go and get the green boxes. Okay, so finally I was going to say on New Year, again, what the First Minister said earlier on, keep family groups to three households. The same applies to New Year as it does to any other day every week. In London, of course, the Mayor Khan of London already said no Trafalgar Square New Year protest, I was about to say, New Year party this year. So this story is about New Year parties in England. I don't know who is having parties, but the guidance is different in England, of course. The Omicron is just the same. It's the rules that are different. Okay, let's move on now. The SNP today has criticised the Tory spineless six for failing Scotland time and time again over key issues. In 2021, Scotland's 6 Tory MPs, who are Douglas Ross, Andrew Bowie, David Dugwid, Alistair Jack, John Lamont and David Mundell, all voted in favour of, and there's a list here, Brian. Firstly, they voted to scrap the £20 a week universal credit uplift. This decision will leave 400,000 people in Scotland £1,040 a year worse off. Secondly, scrapping the triple lock on pensions. This decision will leave over 1 million Scottish pensioners £520 worse off. I take it that means per year. Thirdly, increasing national insurance. This decision will disproportionately hit lower and middle income earners the hardest, a large proportion of whom have already been hit hard by the pandemic, Brexit and a decade of Tory austerity. Fourthly, is that a fourth? The Nationality and Borders Bill. This decision will now allow for the UK government to criminalise victims of torture and refugees looking for safety from trying to come to the UK. Fifthly, cutting international aid. This decision meant that the Tories broke their manifesto commitment to spend 0.7% of gross national income on overseas development aid. And sixthly, cutting tax to banks. This decision means that the UK government will slash tax surcharge on bank profits by more than 60%. Commenting, the SNP's shadow Scotland Secretary Mary Black MP said, "The Tory spineless six have let Scotland down time and time again, and their voting record highlights this. Whether it's taking 1,000 away from 400,000 Scots, or taking £520 from over 1 million Scottish pensioners, or hiking national insurance, which will disproportionately hit the lowest earners, or introducing cruel policies such as the anti-refugee bill, or slashing international aid to the world's poorest in the middle of a pandemic, or allowing multi-billion-pound corporations to pay less tax money. The Tories, quite simply, are rotten to the core. Right, so do you find anything in yourself to agree with what Mary Black says there, Brian?
This, I think, is a very neat summation of the situation that we're in by the SNP. They've taken quite an incredible toll of negative stories and summed them all up in one press release. And I think it's fair to say that these are all policies that a Scottish Government in Holyrood run by the SNP and Green Coalition or Cooperation Agreement, these are all things that they would not support. That's certainly the implication that the fact that the SNP have highlighted this at the moment. And of course, I'm assuming, I didn't have time to check, but I'm assuming that all of the Conservative MPs, Scottish Conservative MPs that you named, I'm sure they voted for these measures, or certainly wouldn't have voted against them.
Yes, I think that's why. I think that was the point that Mary.
Yes, and whereas the opposite would be the case, I'm sure, of the SNP MPs down in Westminster. It's chalk and cheese. The implication is that that the SNP in Westminster and the SNP Green agreement up here would. Yes, this would not happen in an independent Scotland or a Scottish Government. It's also, for me, it always flags up when I hear about Scottish MPs and how they vote in Westminster. It always brings to mind the fact that the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, Douglas Ross, he's both an MP in Westminster and an MSP in Edinburgh, which means that quite often there's a conflict of interest. So not only do they vote in a way that probably wouldn't be agreed by their constituents, but also they end up voting in different ways or calling for different things depending on which parliament they're sitting in at the time. So it's it's very neatly done by the SNP, I think.
Yep. So it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, as you say, the Douglas Ross shows that he's both in government, if you like, supporting the government in Westminster, but he's in the opposition in Scotland. So these opposition MPs, as the point Mary Black's making is that they're voting against Scotland's interests when they go down to London. Interestingly, on that topic, actually, are they supporting Scotland's interests? You probably heard there was an opinion poll published the other day. It's not very common to get opinion polls out at Christmas, but if there were a Westminster general election tomorrow, which there isn't, then probably all of those 6 Scottish MPs would be looking for alternative employment. But I'll leave it to that note. And still with a London policy now, we've heard today that the Ministry of Defence in London has come under fire after revelations that they have spent £13 million, that's this year, on hire cars. A Freedom of Information request, FOI, by the Press Association Media also showed that the Department of Transport spent 1.1 million in a year, October to October, that's on hired cars, while other departments have spent tens of thousands. The total figure was in response to the FOI request, and it came to £14.2 million. Okay, the MOD said its staff had to travel across the UK and to bases all over the world to locations not always accessible with public transport. Unite, the union representing civilian workers in the MOD, however, has criticised the amount of money spent. Unite's acting National Officer for Defence Staff, Karen Evans, said, "This is an entirely excessive figure. It demonstrates how hugely inefficient the MOD is and is exceptionally poor value for money for taxpayers. The revelation of a grandiose spending on hired vehicles by MOD is a kick in the teeth for civilian MOD staff who have experienced a pay freeze this year and are now struggling to make ends meet due to the cost of living crisis in the UK. The money spent on hiring cars could and should have been better spent on giving MOD workers a much needed pay rise." So Brian, like those 6 topics that Mary Black was talking about, MOD's expenses, of course, are reserved. Nothing the Scottish Government can do about it. And as the union has said, hugely inefficient. So if the MOD is wasting or not using our money wisely, we can't do anything about that. That's a reserve issue. But we've got 6 Tory MPs to look after our interests there.
Yes, that's a neat link to the previous story. It's an eye-watering sum of money, and you mentioned in the story that it's been put down to the excessive hiring of grandiose cars, and the MOD's defence when they said, well, we have to travel to far-flung places more so than any other government office. That there may well be something to that. It reminds me of the situation when people or journalists or MPs criticise SNP MPs or Scottish MPs for their claims at Westminster, but they often seem to forget that Scottish MPs are travelling from the furthest away part of the United Kingdom to get to London to do their job there. So that could be part of the reason. So it may well be true that the MOD have got to travel further than their colleagues in other departments. But I wonder if it's just such an eye-watering amount that I wonder if it's not just down to car hire. I wonder if it's maybe because officials in the MOD, instead of taking a flight abroad, they maybe take a military plane or a military helicopter. And if they were to do that, so that's all the crew, all the insurance, just to maybe transport one or two people to a meeting in Paris or Berlin or so. Whereas if they were, and I think that would maybe account for the huge costs rather than just car hire, but I've got no way of saying that for certain.
Well, we don't go into the details. This is just for car hire specifically, so the information I have doesn't go into details on who hired the car and where they went, but it seems to be a lot of money. So it strikes me as particularly ironic that the Ministry of Transport or the Department of Transport has to hire cars. Maybe that's an indication of how well the transport schemes are going. Anyway, another reserved issue, of course. Our next story, Brian, takes us back to the collapse of the regime in Afghanistan earlier this year and Britain's support for the people in that country who worked for the British government. We hear today that about 12,000 Afghan refugees will begin 2022 in UK hotels as the government struggles to persuade enough councils to find permanent homes for these new arrivals. Of the 16,500 people airlifted from Afghanistan to the UK since August, over 4,000 individuals have either moved into a settled home or are in the process of being moved or matched to a suitable home, according to the Department for Work and Pensions, again, the DWP. They will not be evenly distributed across the UK after the government decided not to force local authorities to rehouse the refugees. More than 3,000 local authorities in the UK have offered permanent accommodation, according to the Home Office. According to the most recent figures, by the end of September, councils in Yorkshire and the Humber had welcomed 213 of the 770 Afghans who were resettled across the UK this year. 92 of those were in Bradford, compared to just 24 across all the London councils. After Bradford, Edinburgh welcomed 67 refugees to the city, which is said to be, Edinburgh and Bradford are the cities who have resettled most Afghanis this year. As of the 7th of December, about 7,500 people have been relocated to the UK under the Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy, that's the ARAP, which offered sanctuary to any current or former UK government employees facing intimidation or a threat to their life. Operation Pitting, that's the Afghan airlift in August, brought 15,000 people to the UK. Since the evacuation, a further 1,500 people have followed. More than 12,000 Afghan refugees remain in bridging accommodation as of the 22nd of December, according to the DWP and Home Office. At least 4,000 of those are in London, according to the London Councils, which is the local government association for Greater London. London Council officials described the situation in hotels as chaos and expressed particular concern about the unsuitability of hotels in the long term to accommodate a large number of children currently living in them. The vast majority of Afghan refugees stuck in hotels are not able to work yet because they don't have a permanent address and cannot guarantee to an employer that they will not be shipped across the country with a minimal notice. A number of issues there then. So obviously, Brian, we've, as a country, the UK gave an undertaking to look after these people who had worked for Britain. But there are technical difficulties here, aren't there? I mean, the councils just don't have spare accommodation. Otherwise, presumably every council would welcome these people in. They're heroes, aren't they? War heroes, but there's nowhere to put them.
Yeah, it's quite disconcerting, or it's quite worrying. And just if you think about why this is important, then you only really have to go back to last Glasgow during lockdown in May 2020, when there was a Syrian refugee was killed while he was living in a hotel in Glasgow city centre. So it's serious, to say the least. For me, the two things that stood out from that report, the first was that the Westminster government decided actively to not force councils to take a fair share of refugees. That I would love to see a breakdown of which councils do accept refugees off their own back and which ones decide not to, and to see how those figures fall out or play out. I could make a few guesses as to which way I think it would go. And then, of course, our thoughts go towards those people that didn't make it out of the airlift from Afghanistan. And they're probably in an even more perilous situation than people who are being put up in hotel accommodation here.
Yes, the 15,000 moved is probably a relatively small proportion of the number of people who were assisting the British and who are quite likely to be targeted.
Compared to other nations, I'm sure that is the case. And then again, the fact that when they do come here, when these Afghanistan refugees do come here, if they're put up in a hotel, then technically they have no address. They're homeless, and if you have no address, then you're not going to be able to get a job very easily. Yeah. If you've got no job, you've got no money coming in. If you've got no money coming in, you're not going to get an address, and you end up in this cycle that just goes on and on and on. It has to be broken at some point, and that council accommodation, council housing, or housing associations is the answer.
So, we've invited these people really to become British citizens, but at the moment they're not allowed to work, and it's not possible for them to get a permanent address. So £8 a week and a hotel, that's what we're giving these people who have risked their lives to work for the UK.
Yes, and the image that pops into my mind when I hear about hotel accommodation is, like high-class hotels like the Radisson or places like that. I'm pretty sure that those are not the kinds of hotels that these people are going to be put up in.
Probably not if the UK government is paying for it. Of course, any council, whether it's Scotland or England, I'm sure any council would say, we'd love to help, give us the money. Again, basically the source of the money, of course, is the Treasury. So, and Glasgow doesn't want to put people in hotels, as you say. It's not ideal, particularly for families. So that's why Glasgow doesn't like it. So I'm sure councils would be delighted to help if the government would come up with the money. The UK government, obviously. Okay, Brian, moving on. Now, this is the sort of stuff which I'm afraid we have to read out quite a lot on the news. On Monday evening, that's yesterday, in Denver, Colorado, a gunman shot 4 people to death and wounded 3, including a police officer, in a shooting spree that unfolded in several locations, ending with the police killing the suspect, according to Denver police. Investigators have yet to determine a motive for the rampage, which began about 5 p.m. in Denver time, when a gunman shot and killed 2 women and wounded a man near downtown Denver. Police Chief Paul Pazin said in a news briefing, the suspect then fled in a car and fatally shot a man in East Denver's Cheeseman Park neighbourhood before opening fire again in a West Denver community, although no one was hit. According to Pazin, the suspect twice exchanged gunfire from his vehicle, with Denver officers pursuing him and disabling a police car. From there, the gunman drove into the neighbouring city of Lakewood, where he shot and killed a 4th person inside an unspecified business, according to Lakewood police spokesman John Romero. The gunman then fled from Lakewood police when they attempted to pull him over and engaged in a running gun battle with officers before fleeing on foot and entering a hotel, where he shot and wounded a clerk, Romero said. He then shot at police officers again, wounding one of them before the police shot him dead, Romero told reporters. Authorities did not publicly identify the suspect and said circumstances leading to the shooting remained under investigation. So, Brian, we have no idea who this guy was, of course, and obviously at the time that went to press. The Denver police don't know either. But once again, there do seem to be an awful lot of unhinged people with guns in America.
Yes, it's What can I say? And once again, how many times does this have to happen before people in America realise that they're going to have to do something about their gun control laws? It's written in the Constitution that all Americans have a right to bear arms, but the Constitution was written and designed at a time from the 18th century, I think, when there was no government-led military. If you wanted to raise an army, you would raise your army from your citizens, from farmers and the like. And so yes, it made sense for people to have to be able to own weapons then, but in this day and age, really, there's no need for it. And if you think about what happened in this country after Dunblane, that meant legislation was brought in which tightened gun controls. And so I think for that reason we don't tend to see these kinds of incidents so much in this country. But I don't know what has to happen before America will do what has to be done.
I know if you listen to Michael Moore, who of course has produced at least one, probably two documentary films about guns in America. Bowling for Columbine was one, and I think he also returned to the subject in a later documentary. Well, according to figures like Michael Moore, then in fact most Americans would welcome some degree of sensible gun control. So the political system isn't really reflecting the views of all Americans.
Yeah, there's that crazy situation where some people in America say that they need guns to protect themselves from other gun-owning Americans. So and there may be a grain of truth to that, but again, so just let's get rid of civilians having multiple firearms in their homes.
Yeah, it sounds like mutually assured destruction in your neighbourhood. Yeah, so sadly that's probably not the last time we'll be reporting on such a story. Over to Russia now, Brian. We've heard today that the Russian Supreme Court has ordered the closure of Memorial International, the country's oldest human rights group. The court ruled that Memorial must be closed under the Russians' controversial foreign agent legislation, which has targeted dozens of NGOs and media outlets seen to be critical of the government. Memorial was founded in the late 1980s to document political repressions carried out under the Soviet Union, building a database of victims of the Great Terror and the Gulag camps. The Memorial Human Rights Center, a sister organisation which campaigns for the rights of political prisoners and other causes, is also facing liquidation for, I quote, justifying terrorism and extremism. Memorial International's closure marks an inflection point in Russia's modern history, as in efforts to publicise crimes under Soviet leaders such as Joseph Stalin has become taboo 30 years after the secret government archives were opened after the end of the Soviet Union. Although not seeking a return to communism, Putin has become deeply sensitive to any criticism of the USSR by groups, including Memorial. The lawyer who represented Memorial, Genry Reznik, called the decision to close it political, adding that the hearing reminded him of the Soviet show trials of the 1930s. The decision follows a sustained assault on Russian civil society this year, which has led to opposition leaders such as Alexei Navalny being imprisoned, prominent activists and journalists fleeing the country, and NGOs and media outlets hit with fines and closures under Russia's foreign agents and undesirable laws. The judge, Alla Nazarova, ordered the organisation's closing for repeated and gross violations of Russia's foreign agent laws. The decision will close the Memorial International, Historical, Educational, Charitable and Human Rights Society, its regional branches and other structural units, she said. The Interfax news agency quoted a lawyer for Memorial saying they would appeal both in Russia and to the European Court of Human Rights. The Russian prosecutor portrayed the organisation as a geopolitical weapon being used by foreign governments to deprive modern Russians of taking pride in the achievements of the Soviet Union. A purge of Russia's opposition and independent organisations has continued throughout the year. In the past week, a BBC Russian journalist announced he had fled the country after being named a foreign agent. And OVD Info, a website which monitors arrests and court cases, was blocked again as a foreign agent. Two former coordinators for Alexei Navalny's nationwide political network were also arrested on extremism charges today. It's interesting, Brian, to me, apart from the fact that this is horrible that journalists and other civil society organisations are being banned. It's interesting that this pendulum seems to be moving, for or against the Soviet period. I mean, as early as when I was a wee boy, Khrushchev was beginning to denounce Stalin. First time that happened, anyone actually publicly admitted that what happened was in the 50s. In the 50s was despicable. And we had the liberalisation of people like Solzhenitsyn, remember the author who wrote about the labour camps, actually being let out of jail and his books being publicised in Russia. But they've moved again, and that was in the Gorbachev period, but Putin is moving the pendulum the other way and denying any criticism of the Soviet era.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison maybe between Gorbachev and Putin. The fact that Margaret Thatcher was able to say of Gorbachev, this is a man that we can work with, speaks volumes. I don't think she would maybe say the same thing about Putin. The thing that struck me most about the report that you just read there was the use of organisations like Memorial by the Soviet government to say that, well, the fact that these people exist and the work that they do can be taken by foreign governments and used to stop Russia taking pride in Soviet achievements or in the state achievements. That made me wonder. And then you said that Putin was sensitive to these criticisms by foreign governments, which kind of makes him sound like a bit of a snowflake, which isn't really a word that I would have used or thought I would have been using in terms of Putin. But it also, for me, brought back shades of Trump and Brexit, where the government is able to just spin and deceive to kind of get their own way, and and again the threat to journalism is extremely worrying.
And also Alexei Navalny, what a guy! I think my modern day hero, the modern day Nelson Mandela, I would say. What do you think about a guy who's outside of his country, is a critic, is not allowed to stand in the election for president? He then is almost killed in Germany, and he volunteers to go back to Russia again to continue to oppose Putin, and he's still in jail. As far as I can understand, they jailed him for not being dead after he spent a lot of money trying to kill him. So he's my man of the year, Alexei Navalny.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and I think you should maybe put him up there along with Sergei Magnitsky, who was also imprisoned and I think died at the hands of the Soviet state. And now, in his name, Bill Browder set up the Magnitsky Act, which different governments around the world are all being asked to sign up to. The British government has signed up to it, but has yet to enact it in any way. And again, I think that's telling. But perhaps it's something to do with all the Russian magnates that are buying property in London at the moment. Don't want to upset them too much. Yeah,
there are many webs connecting the UK to Russian oligarchs.
Yeah, funding the Conservative Party.
Indeed, yes, indeed, there are. The Conservatives have even put one of these Russian oligarchs into the House of Lords. Yes, so there's links here. Back to Scotland, we have today a story from MSP for the Scottish Nationalist Party. Karen Adams has today said that Scotland's baby boxes will help families struggling with financial pressure this Christmas. The MSP has said that the festive season can be very tough for those less fortunate, and essential items in the baby box can hopefully lessen some of the pressure on them. Based on the official birth records by local authorities, the number of baby boxes distributed to parents across Scotland reached 200,000 at the end of November. Last year, a record 98% of expectant parents requested the baby box. That's a big rise on 85% when they were first launched in 2017. This is a further vote of confidence for the scheme following the independent evaluation that showed how much parents valued the baby box and its contents. Commenting, Karen Adam, MSP, said, "This time of year is so special, but it can also be very tough for those less fortunate. For many, their household budget struggles to cover the basics, let alone being able to provide their children with the joy of unwrapping an exciting gift. Many of the actions the SNP have taken are making a real difference to children and families in the low incomes, from the game-changing Scottish Child Payment to the baby box." So obviously the baby box has been a very popular policy, so we're reading this out as news because it's reached well, in fact, didn't do it today, but reached a couple of weeks ago, apparently, the 200,000. But 98%, yeah, this is a very popular policy, isn't it, with widespread support throughout Scottish society.
Yeah, for a change, we've got a good story here. What can I say? It seems to me that to alleviate a problem, which is childhood poverty, here we have a relatively inexpensive product that is going to alleviate that problem. It's extremely simple. It's a box full of clothes and baby food and thermometers and the kinds of things that a struggling family might struggle to supply if cash is short, and it's effective. It works. It just seems that so many people in Scotland are buying into this scheme that it's great. It's good news.
Yep. Furthermore, I was looking on this story today, and apparently, yeah, you mentioned thermometers. Apparently, they're improving the contents of the baby box all the time, and apparently they're bringing in a new type of digital thermometer. It goes underneath the baby's arm, and apparently that's more accurate than the in-ear ones that we're using before. So, an excellent scheme, very popular, and getting even better. I'm grateful to the Scotsman for telling us that story about the new improved digital thermometer. So well done, everyone there. Our final story tonight, an environmental story, Brian. An ambitious project is harnessing the power of technology to finally reveal the secret lives of wild Atlantic salmon, backed by £400,000 from the Scottish Government. Atlantic salmon start their lives in streams and rivers before migrating to the high seas to grow and then returning home to spawn, connecting vast ranges of diverse habitats. Little is known about the migration routes of the wild salmon as they leave our rivers, but they travel large distances to feeding grounds in the North Atlantic. Scottish salmon can be found in areas ranging from the seas off West Greenland to the Norwegian Sea. A number of factors, including climate change, has seen the species in serious decline across recent decades, and the West Coast Tracking Project is part of a broad range of measures being used to build the resilience of this iconic species. The multi-year initiative seeks highly trained biologists it sees highly trained biologists, some from the West Coast Fisheries Trust, tagging their young salmon with miniature acoustic transmitters, each having its own unique signature as their migration begins. Strategically placed receivers then record the signal from each tag, allowing the progress of individual fish to be tracked as they pass multiple listening sites. The information will fill key gaps in knowledge of salmon smolts as they migrate from freshwater through the key area of the coastal zone, and will be combined with data such as sea lice distribution and ocean currents. This will provide a strong evidence base to inform aquaculture planning and regulation, as well as informing decisions on locating offshore renewable installations. Rural Affairs Secretary Mary Goodgen said, "The revival of salmon populations and the habitats they depend on will provide multiple benefits to society and will play a significant role in our ambitions for the rural economy." The suite of measures we are taking across Scotland underlines our commitment to tackling the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. Yes, salmon have been under a lot of strain recently, and we don't really know why. Somewhere in that massive journey, not as many salmon return as they used to. So this is helping to say, well, where are they actually going? And maybe that can try and join some of the dots and seeing what is the problem with the salmon population.
Yeah, I suspect that part of the problem is going to be the fact that sea temperatures are rising due to climate change. So the more information we can find out about what's going on here, the better for this species. It's worth noting that salmon is what's known as a keynote species, which means that if it was to be lost, if salmon was to become extinct, then that fact that they're gone would mean that their ecosystem, their habitat would completely change. It's not just that we would lose salmon, but everything else would still stay in place. It would be a major disaster for their ecosystem and their ecological chain or lifelines. It's interesting that thing about that in this day and age that we still know so little about salmon. It's true, they are still mysterious. I couldn't help thinking about the fact, I don't even know if it is a fact, the fact that salmon every year return to the site where they were spawned to reproduce. And I kind of thought, well, if so many rivers have lost salmon, which they have, then that would mean that salmon would never come back to those rivers. And yet they have recently. I've watched salmon jump the weir in the River Kelvin. I've actually seen it, and as far as I know, there was no salmon in the Clyde or the Kelvin, and just a little while back, but they're back now. And even just that iconic status, that mysterious thing about salmon, that is maybe partly why it does hold an iconic space in Scotland's nationhood, or Scotland's soul, or whatever you would want to call it. A little while back I read Neil M. Gunn's Highland River, and there's the main character is called Ken, and there's a lot of instances where he fights salmon in local streams and things like that, and they play a key part in setting up that whole myth about Scotland and myth and legend. I'd thoroughly recommend it, Neil M. Gunn, Highland Rivers. So yeah, I hope this is a success and we're able to see more salmon come back.
Well, let's hope it provides some answers. So as you mentioned, changing sea temperatures presumably has something to do with it, but the links are complicated. Maybe they're increasing the population of sea lice, maybe that's a problem, or maybe it'll turn out that the problem is closer to home. Maybe it's cage fish farms, maybe it's the interaction or crossbreeding between escaping fish farm salmon and the wild salmon. So might be some awkward answers at the end of this research, but at least let's try and find out what's happening. We better move on, Brian. Okay. And it just remains for Brian and I to thank you for watching us again tonight, and particularly a special thank to our regular subscribers. If you would like to join our band of subscribers who keep this station going, then the link on the screen now shows you where our website is to be found, and if you go to broadcastingscotland.scot, you'll see the full range of the programmes that we have in the can, if you like, and the other programmes we intend to make moving into the new year. And as soon as we increase the number of subscribers, we will increase the number of programmes. So remember, Broadcasting Scotland gets no money at all from government sources. And in fact, it's you, our subscribers, who are keeping us going. So Brian and I thank you for that. And if you can, please, into the new year, £5 a month minimum, and you are one of our subscribers. You're one of the Broadcasting Scotland family. So thanks very much for watching us again tonight, and I'll be back tomorrow. So from Brian and myself in Glasgow, it's good night, and we'll see you later. Bye. That's it, Brian.